So we've been on an insane grind per usual in Tribe 9, and I feel like this is the perfect time to talk about tension card investment, TP, Kane. How exactly can you utilize this efficiently? And I feel like this is something that I've been actually getting asked quite a bit, so I felt like we have to talk about it. I'm at the point now where I'm starting to actually consider what cards I want to actually take to level 50. One of the big things that I did that I would definitely recommend a lot of players, especially if you're more casual, to not do, is just spreading your currency all over the place. And this actually for me makes sense, but I know that sometimes when people see my account or they see the things that I'm doing, they feel like, well, if he's doing it, then maybe that's something I should be doing. I was going through a process where I was actually trying to test out a lot of different cards. One thing I would recommend you guys to definitely not do is just going and leveling cards to level 10, right? Because that's extra currency, TP, that could be going into a card that you actually want to focus. And there's a lot of spread value. There's even some cards that I just ultimately decided, nah, I don't really want to use that, right? And so that's ultimately another big barrier that I would say, if it wasn't for the fact that obviously I spend in this game and I put as much time as I do in this game, that could have actually been a big hindrance to what I was essentially trying to aim for and what was overall my goal for the composition that I was trying to make. I wanted to actually touch on this primarily because I think that there's a lot of players that feel like, well, if these are cards that I'm utilizing in my main composition, I should be full send investing in them. And I want to kind of talk about a couple of different things that are actually going to translate overall to these types of cards that are like this. So first one I want to mention here is Strike Zone. I feel like Strike Zone is definitely a card that you don't want to overinvest in, because if we actually read the effect here, it says tension needed to activate the effect is phase 0. But then when you also are looking at the effect target, it's all party members. But when we get to what the actual core of the skill is when a secondary attack hits, increases secondary attack damage multiplier by X amount, which is here, it's 1.3%. But at the start of battle, grant party members unity. In reality, do I really care about that secondary attack hit, increase secondary attack damage multiplier by whatever, right? No, I don't, right? Like that is completely irrelevant to what my goal is, because the other cards I'm using are fixated on ultimate skill damage multiplier, crit rate, right? With some defense. Do I really care about this, or do I even really have anything that's really making this 1% that valuable? Not really. The only thing that I'm really looking at from this card is the fact that it's granting me the unity. This is something that is going to be the biggest thing that's going to save a lot of you guys resources. There are certain activation cards, and you have to be very specific on which ones they are and read them, because there's some like this, for example, that grants you the effect and that's it, right? So this card could have literally been level 1 and it wouldn't have mattered, because there isn't any like specific time window that's granted for the unity. Unity is just on you from the beginning. A card that you might have to actually take a little bit further, for example, would be something like, let's say if you're trying to do unbending or unbending, for example, right? So it says when granting a shield, grant that character unbending for 3.6 seconds. So when you're talking about cards that have time windows on them, these are cards that you might have to dive a little bit deeper into how much more time would you need for you to be able to execute the next said card. Because the thing is that when you're looking at these effects, understanding the time windows you have are also going to be really important. For example, I have to keep in mind that if I'm trying to say execute an ult so that I can scale the next ult's damage, I have to be aware of what the initial effects are that are coming before, activating those effects at the right time, and really honestly trying to make sure you have cards that just make that much more seamless for you. But then when you go and you're trying to then go into, say, like the last said effect or said card that you want to activate that just kind of ties everything all together, knowing and understanding these windows are going to just make that much easier. For example, the card setup that I currently have, I know that here, this doesn't really matter, right? Because I'm getting that increased crit rate and that defense point is just there, right? And this is why I would say Full Party is still one of the best cards for you to start out investing in. Honestly, a lot of people should, in my opinion, full send this card just because the effect of it, its crit rate, its defense point. These are two values. No matter what you do with your composition, it is going to be a card that you're going to see in most setups, if not a lot of setups. Some cards you can't actually adjust or change those windows. So like, for example, 5 seconds is basically the window that I get for this ultimate skill damage multiplier. For this one, there isn't anything that is affecting this outside of when we're looking at the other effect. And if I'm not using that other effect where it's giving the extra 23.22%, then that doesn't really matter, right? This is something that, like, again, is really when I'm looking at my timer, the lowest time amount that I have is going to be this 5-second window on the leading wisdom. And then when I look at the things to hold on to, this has a 30-second window. I'm ultimately looking at, okay, when do I need to make sure I'm popping this off? Obviously, when this activates, really the card that I'm really fixating on making sure is active is this card because it's my lowest time window. But everything else I have doesn't have a time window that I need to really be worried about. This is going to vary and change from build to build, but this ultimately would be how I'm able to execute. Like when you guys see me doing crazy damage, I'm paying attention to these things, mind you. Just kind of getting a little bit more into the thought process because things aren't just necessarily randomly put together, or they're not just, hey, put these things together and they just work. There are things in combat itself that you have to also be paying attention to as well, right? When does it proc? How does it proc, etc. When we're also looking at like other cards that have similar values to like the unity, like for example, this one, when granting or when a character grants a shield, grant that character kingship, right? So you're not worried about a time window, which is a huge thing that honestly could be saving you a ton of value. I know there's a lot of people building into kingship. I know there's a lot of people obviously using unity and a couple of other variations of different abilities that exist in the game. Now, the next thing that I want to point out here, we have to talk about cost, because I think one of the things that a lot of players don't actually realize is how expensive it actually gets. So I actually intentionally was waiting to show you guys this. When we get to level 40, what you're going to actually have here, for example, like this is a tension card. This is a 3-star tension card, mind you, that can go up to level 50. Now, when we're starting to look at the resources here, you need 20 of the plasmatic drive servo, 100 of the blood tears, but this is where things get a little bit kind of like, yeah, you got to farm this. Core of the negligence, we need 16 of those. We need the perfect headpiece, we need 8 of those. You need the biting saw, which these are fairly easy to get in my opinion, especially if you're already at the point of farming like some of the harder stuff, or sorry, not harder stuff, but like the chapter bosses. And this is where this might kind of get a lot of players, right? The polyhedral codex 3. How exactly do you get this? Well, your number one source is going to be the Fractal Vice. The Polyhedral Codex 3 itself isn't necessarily going to be the drop that drops, but if we go over to the crafting bench, the resource you're primarily going to be seeing is the Polyhedral Codex 2, and or it's going to be mainly the Polyhedral Codex 1. I have 578 of this resource, and that's just because, again, I do a lot of Fractal Vice. I try to make sure every single week I clear out every chest, everything that I can possibly open in there. I don't even think I hit every chest a lot of the time. I might have like a couple that I miss, but I try to make sure I clean out as much of that as possible, because this is now going to be dramatically affecting my overall potential of what I can invest in. Do you have to like grind nearly as much as me? No, not realistically. I mean, the biggest thing is understanding what the like biggest part or the biggest resource requires, which it needs 10 of the Polyhedral Codex 2s. And in order to make, say, 10 of those, for example, you basically are going to need, for example, here, 300 of the Polyhedral Codex 1. That is still a pretty good amount. And so when you're actually looking at like what you should be investing in or what's going to be the most valuable for you to invest in, you have to also consider the amount of grind and resources that actually goes into taking that thing to, say, its capacity or cap capacity. When we're looking at even the cards, depending on the value, which is the rarity of the card, that's also going to change what the potential like resource cost might look like really. When we're even looking at this, like obviously this is at 8, not 16. This is at 5, not I think 10, right? But it's still going to require the Polyhedral Codex 3s. So this again is just something that you have to consider. I think like one of the things that a lot of people bring up, like, oh, it's not more important to go for Kane off your dailies versus TP. Honestly, I think it's a balance of both. Like you're going to have to just reasonably save them over the course of like a few days whenever you are planning on leveling something to, say, level 50. Now, I would say the sweet spot for most cards is going to be about level 40 if you're more casual. Honestly, even some cards level 30. I definitely would say that you're squeezing every bit of like utility when you start pushing into level 50. Do I think level 50 is required? Not necessarily, but it is nice to have. Depending on the amount of time you could put into the game, that is going to drastically affect what your resources might look like and how much further you would push on something like this. So level 40 might be a good general baseline for a lot of players, just simply because they don't have a ton of time. If you're willing to save and stack up resources and grind little by little, you'll eventually be able to do things like level 50, uncapping things and, you know, maxing them out. The other thing that I know that some people are going to be asking me is duplicates. Is it like required for you to be aiming for dupes of these cards? And do you need to, ascend all day? Like, no, you don't, right? Like ascensions are nice, but they aren't required for you to really be getting a ton of value out of the cards. Ascensions do help. Don't get me wrong. They absolutely do. Like for example, I have this EX card here. And when we go to ascend it, you can actually see that what we're getting here. So like, I think the base was what it was. This is actually leveled a little bit. So I think the base actually goes up here. And it'll show you what number on the multiplier will go up. And I think it's just the base numbers here, right? These are the only numbers that get affected. So those numbers will go up slightly, but it's not going to be so crazy where you're like trying to get a whole bunch of 3 stars to ascend, right? If you obviously have them for lower rarities, by all means use them. Now, lastly, as far as the cards that you absolutely should be taking all the way up, it needs to be the cards that are going to be the most impactful to the specific thing that you're trying to execute. So for example, like I mentioned before, I'm trying to execute ultimate skill damage multiplier or ultimate skills, right? Not even just the multiplier, but I'm trying to execute ultimate skills with my Miyu, for example. Or if I'm using like, say, I don't know, my MC, I'm really like leaning into the ultimates, right? Now that's something that I would say would be the thing that you want to increase, because the more that you increase that value, essentially the sky is the limit really at that point. Versus like if you're playing a completely different game where like, say for example, you need more attack point, right? Then maybe ultimate damage might not be the thing that you're really emphasizing. Not saying you won't be using a card like that, but you might be actually going for something like the Gem of Flames, instead maxing this out, where this is going to be something that increases that attack point. So if that's the value that you're actually looking to scale the most, then that's the thing that you should be investing the most resources into. Now, of course, this is going to be subjective to obviously what type of build you're using. I know some people also rather kind of create a general baseline and have multiple different compositions built up. But I would definitely say that for the way that it seems that Tribe 9 is set up, there's a lot of things that you can just generally do that you just want to do. It's nothing that's like, hey, you have to have a team comp set up specifically for this. You can have different variations for maybe bossing versus farming, but I don't think that that necessarily even requires you to be utilizing an entirely different skill, like say kingship versus unity. I mean, you could still have a bossing build for unity and or a farming build that you're using for mobbing with unity, for example, right? So that's just, again, just kind of giving you guys a little bit more, no pun intended, gems, so that you can basically make better decisions on your account and you're not feeling like you're really not progressing. Because ultimately the goal is that you want to solidify, I feel like personally, your main composition, whether that be not just the units, but also the tension cards. Because now that we have a lot of tension cards with the tension costs removed, it's only going to make it that much easier for you to be able to grind in the game. Being able to get to those sub 30 second, 27 seconds, I even see some of you guys doing, with even lower level investment tension cards. But I know that that's even only going to be better in actually future proofing and basically preparing you for future content the more that you have things already kind of done. So again, I guess if you really have to ask the question of like, is this necessary to do? I feel like it is, because the devs already told us that the next set content coming into the game is going to be even harder. So it's always better to be better prepared than not to be prepared at all and then trying to get ready for it at the last second. That's basically going to be that with this one, guys. I definitely would say that when it just comes down to micromanaging and managing tension cards, I really am now starting to be a lot more conscious of how I'm spending my resources, because again, I have a ton of time to put into the game, but some of you guys might not, right? And that's just a really, really big thing to just kind of consider. So that's going to be that with this one, guys. We're going to have some more videos coming real soon, and we'll be streaming soon. So if you guys haven't, make sure you guys join the Discord. We got a ton of things coming. So that's going to be that with this one, guys. Everyone stay blessed, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.